London, 1666. A city alive with color, sound, and movement. Its narrow cobbled streets bustling with merchants, apprentices, and beggars. Horse-drawn carts rattled over uneven stone. The cries of street vendors echoed through alleys, and the scent of bread, smoke, and the river mingled in the air. Towering timber-framed houses leaned over the streets like silent sentinels, their overhanging upper floors almost brushing one another, forming dark corridors where shadows flickered under the lantern light. Life thrummed across the city, yet beneath its vibrancy lingered a quiet vulnerability. For decades, Londoners had lived under the constant threat of fire. Wooden structures, thatched roofs, and narrow streets created an invisible fuse waiting to ignite. The city had endured plague and political upheaval, yet nothing could prepare it for what was coming. As the sun set on September 2, 1666, an unseen spark would awaken the city's hidden danger. A single bakery on Pudding Lane would become the epicenter of a disaster that would engulf London in flames. In mere hours, familiar streets and cherished landmarks would vanish, and thousands would find themselves fleeing for survival. The stage was set for one of history's most infamous catastrophes, the Great Fire of London. London in 1666 was a city of contrasts. Its grandeur was evident in the towering spires of churches, the majestic buildings of the royal court, and the bustling quays of the River Thames, where ships from across the globe disgorged spices, silks, and exotic goods. Yet behind this veneer of prosperity lay narrow alleys, overcrowded homes, and streets lined with timber-framed buildings that leaned precariously toward one another. Many houses were connected by wooden galleries or overhangs, forming tunnels through which the everyday life of Londoners flowed. The population, estimated at around 80,000 in the city proper, carried on with a vibrant rhythm of daily life. Street markets overflowed with fish, vegetables, and livestock, and the cries of vendors echoed across the thoroughfares. Taverns and inns provided refuge for weary travelers and locals alike, filled with laughter, music, and the occasional brawl. Apprentices and craftsmen could be seen honing their trades, while noblemen and merchants navigated the city in a display of wealth and status. Economically, London was a thriving hub. Trade routes along the Thames connected the city to the continent, bringing goods, wealth, and cultural exchange. Shipbuilding, commerce, and artisanal crafts flourished. However, this prosperity came with a price. Many buildings were tightly packed, leaving little space between homes and businesses. The wooden construction of homes and the prevalence of thatched roofs rendered the city a tinderbox. Fires had broken out before, often causing localized destruction, but the risk of a massive inferno was ever present. Culturally, London was alive with art, music, and literature. Playhouses staged the works of Shakespeare and his contemporaries, while coffeehouses became centers for debate, commerce, and intellectual exchange. Yet amid the energy and prosperity lay a city unprepared for catastrophe. Narrow streets and combustible buildings, coupled with a lack of organized firefighting infrastructure, created an environment primed for disaster. The Thames, wide and vital, was both a lifeline and a danger. Its quays facilitated trade and travel, yet the river also became a pathway for evacuation in times of crisis, as citizens fled from fire and smoke. Amid this lively, chaotic, and perilous environment, Londoners carried on largely unaware of the approaching disaster that would alter the city forever. The vibrancy, the trade, the crowded streets, all would soon become fuel for a fire that would sweep through the heart of London. It began quietly, almost innocuously, in the early hours of September 2, 1666. Thomas Farriner, the king's baker, had closed his shop on Pudding Lane and retired for the night. But within the cramped, timber-frame structure, a small ember or spark from the oven awakened and ignited the dry, flour-dusted timbers. The fire smoldered at first, flickering silently under the shadows of the neighboring houses, until it erupted into flames that quickly leapt from roof to roof. At first, neighbors watched in disbelief. Fires were common in London, after all, and often easily contained. Yet Pudding Lane's flames grew rapidly, feeding on wood, pitch, and other combustible materials. The heat intensified, black smoke curled upward, and sparks drifted across the roofs, landing like deadly seeds on the streets below. When the Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was informed, his reaction proved tragically insufficient. Dismissing the blaze as minor, he refused to authorize aggressive firefighting measures. "Pish! A woman might piss it out," he allegedly exclaimed, underestimating the inferno that had already begun its destructive course. This hesitation proved fatal, allowing the fire to gain strength while citizens scrambled to douse it with buckets of water or dismantle nearby houses. The city's infrastructure played a cruel role. Narrow streets and closely packed homes acted as a conduit for the fire's spread. Wells and water sources were inadequate, and organized firefighting teams did not exist. The wooden buildings, coated with pitch and tar, were like kindling stacked in every neighborhood. As a dry, hot summer had parched the city, the fire found little resistance in the flammable materials that composed London's architecture. Wind further fueled the blaze, carrying embers across streets, igniting new houses, and spreading panic. Citizens awoke to the roar of flames and the crackling collapse of buildings, realizing that what began as a small bakery fire was quickly becoming a disaster of unimaginable scale. Families fled with what they could carry, horses bolted, and chaos enveloped the city. In those first hours, the true horror of what lay ahead was only beginning to reveal itself. A spark in Pudding Lane had awakened the city's hidden vulnerability, and Londoners would soon discover the devastating power of fire unleashed upon a metropolis unprepared for such a catastrophe. By the morning of September 2, 1666, the fire had already begun to assert its terrifying dominion over London. What started as a small flame on Pudding Lane transformed into a roaring inferno, consuming everything in its path. The narrow streets acted as funnels for the heat and smoke, and the wooden homes, densely packed, provided a feast for the hungry flames. Sparks leapt from rooftop to rooftop, carried by a brisk easterly wind, igniting new blazes with terrifying speed. Entire neighborhoods were engulfed before citizens could mount a serious defense. From Fish Street Hill to Cheapside, the city seemed to be melting under a crimson sky, the smoke turning day into night. The sound of crackling timber, shattering glass, and collapsing walls filled the air. Families fled, clutching whatever possessions they could carry, while the cries of those trapped in burning homes echoed above the roar of the fire. Key landmarks fell to the flames with relentless inevitability. St. Paul's Cathedral, the pride of London, was engulfed in smoke and fire, its spire succumbing to the inferno. The Royal Exchange, Guildhalls, and 87 parish churches were reduced to rubble, along with countless homes and shops. The economic heart of the city was destroyed, leaving thousands without livelihoods. Even the Thames, usually a lifeline, reflected the fire's orange glow and became a place of refuge for those fleeing the streets. Boats crowded with families drifted along the river, carrying the displaced, their faces illuminated by the hellish reflection of the flames. Eyewitnesses recorded scenes of chaos and despair. One survivor described seeing the flames mounting to the very heavens, the smoke like a black curtain hiding the sun, while people ran hither and thither, not knowing where to turn. Another recounted the horror of neighbors attempting to save their homes with buckets of water, only to watch helplessly as walls and roofs collapsed into roaring fire. The fire's speed was astonishing. What might have been contained in hours transformed into 4 relentless days of destruction. By September 5th, the fire had devastated an area roughly 4/5 of the city of London, leaving smoldering ruins and shattered streets. The sheer scale of destruction, homes, churches, and shops, created a scene of apocalyptic devastation, the likes of which London had never witnessed. Yet amidst the ruin, small acts of heroism emerged. Citizens rescuing neighbors, firefighters risking their lives to pull families from collapsing buildings, and local officials directing evacuations with whatever means they could muster. The Great Fire of London was no longer a local blaze. It had become a force that seemed almost sentient, devouring everything in its path, leaving a charred skeleton of the city behind. And as the flames continued to rage, Londoners began to understand that their home, their lives, and their very sense of security had been irrevocably changed. Our understanding of the Great Fire is enriched by the accounts of those who lived through it. Among the most famous chroniclers was Samuel Pepys, whose diary provides an intimate, gripping portrayal of the city in flames. On September 2nd, he wrote, Jane called us up about 3 in the morning to tell us of a great fire they saw in the city. I rose and went to the window. I saw the fire grow and the smoke rise like a tower, threatening all London. Pepys's diary captures both the horror and human drama. Neighbors helping one another, frantic efforts to salvage belongings, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness as fire consumed homes and landmarks. His observations allow historians to reconstruct the fire's path, the city's vulnerabilities, and the personal experiences of those affected. Another essential source is the diary of John Evelyn, who provided detailed reflections on the fire and its societal impact. Evelyn noted the Inferno's destruction of churches, the collapse of St. Paul's spire, and the extraordinary bravery of citizens attempting to save property and lives. His writings emphasize the fire's role as both a physical and psychological catastrophe, revealing how deeply the disaster shook the city's inhabitants. Letters and reports from survivors further illuminate the human cost. Merchants lamented the loss of their shops and goods. Families described fleeing in terror, and officials recorded the logistical challenges of evacuations. Together, these accounts present a composite portrait of London at its most vulnerable. Chaotic, frightened, and yet resilient. Historical analysis confirms the extraordinary speed of the fire. Contemporary records indicate that over 13,000 houses, 87 parish churches, and numerous public buildings were destroyed. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts, revealing layers of ash, charred timbers, and foundations of lost structures. Such records highlight both the scale of the devastation and the lessons learned about urban vulnerability and fire safety. As the flames raged, authorities and citizens scrambled to contain the disaster. Early efforts were fragmented. Militia and local volunteers attempted to demolish houses to create fire breaks, while individuals carried buckets of water to douse flames. Yet the city's unpreparedness and the fire's ferocity made these measures largely insufficient. The immediate human toll was staggering. Thousands were left homeless, forced to sleep in fields, along riverbanks, or in makeshift shelters. Many lost all possessions. Furniture, clothing, and heirlooms vanished in the blaze. The economic impact was catastrophic. Merchants lost shops and goods, artisans lost workshops, and the city's trade was temporarily paralyzed. Insurance, as we understand it today, did not exist. Those who could not rebuild faced ruin. The fire's consequences extended beyond the material. London's social fabric was shaken. Displacement forced communities to scatter, while the homeless were vulnerable to disease and crime. Political criticism arose, focusing on the perceived failure of city authorities, particularly the Lord Mayor, whose hesitation had allowed the fire to escalate. In the longer term, the Great Fire prompted significant changes. Authorities recognized the need for improved urban planning, stricter building codes, and organized firefighting measures. The disaster accelerated the development of insurance schemes and emergency response practices, laying the groundwork for a more resilient city. Yet amidst ruin and upheaval, a remarkable resilience emerged. Citizens rebuilt homes, businesses, and lives, drawing on communal solidarity and determination. The fire, while a cataclysmic event, became a catalyst for reform and modernization. London would rise from its ashes, transformed in both physical structure and civic consciousness. Even as the flames faded, the memory of those 4 terrifying days lingered, shaping policies, perceptions, and the collective identity of a city determined never to forget the lesson of 1666. When the last embers of the Great Fire were extinguished on September 6, 1666, London lay in ruins. Streets were blackened and barren, homes reduced to ash, and once proud landmarks had vanished. Yet amidst the despair, a vision emerged. The opportunity to rebuild a city stronger, safer, and more magnificent than before. The devastation, though tragic, provided a blank slate upon which planners and architects could reimagine the urban landscape. Sir Christopher Wren, already renowned for his architectural expertise, became central to London's transformation. Tasked with rebuilding St. Paul's Cathedral, Wren envisioned a structure of grandeur and resilience, combining classical elegance with fire-resistant materials. His plans extended beyond ecclesiastical architecture. Wren advocated for streets to be widened, thoroughfares straightened, and public spaces designed to prevent the spread of future fires. Other architects and city planners contributed to this ambitious reconstruction. Brick and stone replaced timber as the primary building materials, while fire breaks were strategically incorporated into the city's layout. Regulations were introduced mandating the use of non-flammable materials, limiting overhanging upper stories, and establishing minimum distances between structures. Streets were no longer cramped alleys but broader corridors, providing safer passage and access for emergency response. Rebuilding was a monumental effort, involving thousands of laborers, masons, carpenters, and merchants. Homes were reconstructed, marketplaces reopened, and churches slowly rose from the ashes. The transformation was not immediate. It took decades for London to fully recover. Yet by the late 17th century, the city had evolved into a more resilient and modern urban center. Its skyline dominated by new churches, civic buildings, and the rebuilt St. Paul's Cathedral. A symbol of hope and renewal, the fire's destruction had paradoxically paved the way for progress. It spurred advancements in urban planning, construction techniques, and public safety. Londoners learned from catastrophe, transforming vulnerability into innovation. Amid the charred remains, a new city emerged. A city rebuilt on the lessons of tragedy, one that would endure for centuries. The Great Fire of London has inspired myths, legends, and cultural reflections that endure to this day. One widely circulated myth suggests that the fire ended the Great Plague by destroying the rats responsible for spreading the disease. While historians debate the accuracy of this claim, the story has become part of London's collective memory, illustrating how humans seek meaning in disaster. Artistic and literary representations further immortalize the event. Contemporary sketches, engravings, and paintings depicted the fire's terrifying spectacle. The towering flames, billowing smoke, and fleeing citizens, capturing both the horror and heroism of those days. Writers and chroniclers, from Samuel Pepys to later historians, have turned the fire into a narrative of suspense, tragedy, and resilience. These works ensure that the Great Fire remained not only a historical event, but a cultural touchstone. The fire also shaped London's identity. It served as a turning point, reminding the city of its fragility while demonstrating its capacity for renewal. Commemorations, such as the Monument to the Great Fire, designed by Wren, stand as enduring reminders of the disaster. They celebrate human courage, architectural innovation, and the city's rebirth, preserving the memory of 1666 for generations. Ultimately, the fire became more than a catastrophe. It became a symbol. It reminds Londoners and the world of the delicate balance between civilization and disaster, the interplay of vulnerability and resilience, and the enduring power of community in the face of overwhelming odds. The Great Fire of London was a tragedy that reshaped the city, its people, and its history. In just 4 days, flames consumed thousands of homes, churches, and landmarks, leaving a scar on the urban landscape and the collective consciousness of Londoners. The city's bustling streets and timbered homes, so full of life before the fire, were reduced to ash and rubble, leaving thousands homeless and a population in shock. Yet from the devastation arose resilience and innovation. Citizens, architects, and authorities learned from catastrophe, implementing reforms in urban planning, construction, and public safety. The rebuilt city, with wider streets, fire-resistant materials, and the majestic St. Paul's Cathedral, became a testament to human ingenuity and determination. London's response to disaster illustrated the ability of a community to rebuild stronger than before, transforming tragedy into progress. The fire also left an enduring cultural and historical legacy. Through diaries, letters, sketches, and later historical analyses, the Great Fire of London became a story of suspense, courage, and caution. It reminded generations that even in a thriving metropolis, human civilization remains vulnerable to the forces of nature and misjudgment. As we reflect on the events of 1666, the lessons remain clear. Preparation, vigilance, and resilience are essential when confronting disaster. The Great Fire of London, though a devastating historical disaster, ultimately demonstrated the capacity for renewal, adaptation, and growth. It stands as both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder that even when civilization falters, the human spirit endures, rebuilding from the ashes to create a future shaped by both memory and hope.